Good morning, everybody. Hey there. Hello.
Howdy.
Good morning. Good morning. We have jumping on and joining us. And so we had our first guest last night, our first politician join us into the sukkah last night. And it was very nice to meet him. He was a very nice young guy. Tracy wanted to know whether he was single or not. Kip Muller. I I hope she wasn't interested for herself, but no, he's a very nice young guy, and he's and he's a Jewish guy. So I think that was the big reveal last night, was that a guy named Kip Muller. Kip Muller was Jewish. His dad is German, or his dad passed away, but his dad was German American, and his mother is Jewish. He was raised at Congregation B'nai Israel in Sacramento. So he told the story of how when he was a young guy, a young kid, his synagogue was firebombed, and no one was hurt, but they did. I remember the fire that they had there, and he said that was one of the formative experiences of his life, of remembering his synagogue, cleaning up the debris and seeing the effect of that. It had a big impact on him. So interesting guy. So he's running against my friend Scott Wilk, who is my friend. I mean, I've been friends with him for a long time, but it was an interesting story that he shared, and definitely interesting story.
I hope you're not going to let your friendship calling you.
I can't, but it is strange because he's one of the few politicians that I can say I actually, would invite over for, to visit. But yes, no, I can't. And the reality is that I wouldn't do it anyways. I'm not gonna. But I do have to disclose the fact that Scott was at my daughter's bat mitzvah, and known him for a long time. But who knows? Y'all know Kip Muller for a long time too. But I wouldn't say he's old enough. He's a little bit older than my kids. I mean, I think he's 34, but he's not that much older than my kids. He's definitely closer to my kids' age than my age. So we'll see. Interesting landscape. We have two Republicans that are coming the next 2 days that are the assembly candidates, both women. Very different stories there too. But yes, two Republicans got through the primary, so they're running against each other for the assembly seat. So by the way, I have to disclose too, technically I can't vote for either Scott Wilk or Kip Muller because I live in Henry Stern's district, and it's a very small part of Santa Clarita, but we didn't have him come, him and the guy that he's running against, because it represents
Give me a second.
Santa Clarita. So I didn't have those guys. The two others.
Rabbi, your internet's going in and out, just to let you know.
It says I have super strong internet. I actually worked on it 2 days ago, specifically for this, to make sure I could get internet in my sukkah. So hold it 1 second. Let me see what the story is. I even talked to my cousin at AT&T to see if maybe I'll switch over to AT&T and get a new internet. Right now, it says my internet speed is 105, 107. What do you do? I mean, the internet itself says it's
What are they doing?
really fast. What I'm going to do, I'm going to close out some of maybe it's my computer. All right. So yeah, that's important to have a good internet speed when you're bringing in people into your sukkah. So it worked though yesterday. I have to say we had a good good internet speed out in the sukkah. So that was good. That was not a problem. But yeah, it's sad that that's one of the things we have to worry about now is our internet. The last week when we started looking, actually kind of the last couple weeks, looking at these last parts of the Midrash that we're looking at, I was thinking about, I always like to share the Torah that it's based on. But the weird thing is that there is no Torah for this part that we're reading about. There is no Torah in the sense that this Midrash that we're reading about the sons of Jacob, I mean, we literally have one line that says that they died. Other than that, there's no other, there is nothing else. Actually, it doesn't say that the brothers died. It says at the beginning of Exodus that the brothers died. But there's nothing in Genesis that tells us about what happened, because the last line is that Joseph died. So right now we're kind of like in space, if you will, in the sense that there is no text to ground this on other than the brothers at some point died. But we really don't have anything here to help us with what happens to Joseph's brothers, whatever you want to say, Jacob's other sons. Last week we started taking a look at Reuben and looking at what one of the few things that we learn about any of the sons of Jacob, that Reuben did commit this sin against his father of sleeping with Bilhah, and what that meant to him, which was, number one, it meant that he lost his place as the number one son. But we do read that he died at 125, and that he was buried when he was buried, that he was actually buried at the cave of Machpelah, that he was buried with his father and grandfather and great grandfather Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in that cave. So we read that he gets to be buried there. And that was the first one of the patriarchs we read about. Again, we know Joseph is not buried in that cave, but we read that Reuben was, which kind of at least says that even though he lost his place on the flow chart, he didn't lose his ability to kind of be forgiven and be brought back into the fold, in the sense that he has his place in the family plot. But we know that the other sons, specifically Simon and Levi, also had some problems. The question of what the other brothers did with regards to Joseph, well, let's see how that plays out in their accounting, in their final accounting, if you will. So what we're going to be reading today, as we read a little bit last week, is the last days of the other brothers. And again, none of this, literally none of this is in the Torah. So this is primarily from the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, a book of the Pseudepigrapha, a book that was written by Jews but was not kept by the Jewish community. And we don't really have, in the traditional Midrash, in the traditional sections of Jewish legend, we didn't have a lot of this. This was preserved primarily by the church, and then, as Jews started going back and reading some of these books that were Jewish written books, but not books that we kept, we started seeing some of these stories, and they're consistent with the Midrash. We just didn't keep them, if you will. So, and that is the weird situation here, that what we're reading, for a lot of centuries, Jews didn't have access to this. They didn't read it. So I will let me get up there and start start sharing it. I'm going to start up on Facebook as we have a chance to share this with everybody. By the way, as I do this, I'll just do a commercial. If you want to order the commemorative Temple Beth Ami wine glasses, we have about a dozen or so wine glasses. Even if you didn't come to the wine and cheese Sunday night, which was really quite fun, everybody. I have to say it went really well. I want to thank my wife for putting that on. And we have the commemorative glasses. So even though you didn't maybe drink with us then, you can anytime you want with your Temple Beth Ami glass, commemorative glasses. So that is my little commercial as we get ready for, and we're now up and running with our stuff on Facebook now. So we are on Facebook. And again, we were still having some people jump on and get with us here today. So we have Rosemary.
Yes.
The lovely Rosemary Watson is going to be reading for us.
I'll drink to that.
Thank you.
There it is. Judith started early today. Judith, she went straight to vodka.
You can put orange juice in it.
She went straight to vodka. She said, I don't need the orange juice. Give me the vodka.
No, that would be a mimosa without the orange juice.
All right. So, everybody, good morning. And again, let's read what these brothers, what at least the imagination of what these brothers did before they died. And this is now Shimon, Simon, and what can he teach us? So much from a life not always well lived. Here we go.
Shimon's admonition against envy. Yes. As Reuben confessed his sin upon his deathbed and warned his children and his family to be on their guard against unchastity, the vice that had brought about his fall, so Shimon, when he was about to die, assembled his sons around him and confessed the sin he had committed. He had been guilty of boundless envy of Joseph, and he spoke, I was the second son begotten by my father Jacob, and my mother Leah called me Shimon, because the Lord had heard her prayer. I waxed strong and shrank from no manner of deed, and I was afraid of nothing, for my heart was hard and my liver unyielding and my bowels without mercy. And in the days of my youth, I was jealous of Joseph, for our father loved him more than all the rest of us, and I resolved to kill him. For the prince of temptation sent the spirit of jealousy to take possession of me, and it blinded me so that I did not consider Joseph to be my brother. And I spared not even my father Jacob. But his God and the God of his fathers sent his angel and saved him out of my hands.
So that's pretty wild, because what are they talking about here? Something that we don't really, something that we really don't have, or at least have in the same way that whoever's writing this has it. Because it seems like there's angels and demons involved in this story that we don't have really in the Torah. So let's see where this possibly could have come from. But it definitely shows us that by this point, those types of stories of angelic and demonic actions start playing out in some types of midrash, and at least in some types of legend. So here, let's take a look at where they get this from.
When I went to Shechem to fetch ointment for the herds, and Reuben was in Dothan, where all our supplies and stores were kept, our brother Judah sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. On his return, when he heard what had happened, Reuben was very sad, for he had been desirous of saving Joseph and bringing him back to our father. But as for me, my wrath was enkindled against Judah that he had let him escape alive. My anger abode with me all of 5 months, but the Lord restrained me from using the power of my hands, for my right hand withered for the length of 7 days. Then I knew what had happened was for the sake of Joseph. I repented and prayed to God to restore my hand and withhold me henceforth from all sorts of defilement, envy, and folly. For 2 years, I gave myself up to fasting and the fear of God, for I perceived that redemption from jealousy could come only through the fear of God.
So you can see here that Simon says in this version of the story that Simon wanted to kill him and did not want Joseph to get away, and he's actually mad at Judah for allowing Joseph to get away. That he actually would have attacked his own other full brother Judah because of allowing Joseph to survive. And what's weird about this is that he actually gets physically, I mean, he becomes disabled physically through a miracle, and God, teaches him a lesson, if you will, through his inability to have his strength in his right hand, which is his fighting hand, his attacking hand. And this is this weird kind of miracle of again, we don't have any of this in the Torah. We don't have any indication that this kind of thing happened, but yet we have this story here, which is pretty bizarre in a way. I mean, I guess you could say it makes sense. I mean, there was a reason why Simon finally starts to see the light, if you will. But here it requires him to literally become physically disabled for a week before he realizes that that what he's supposed to do. So all of this is going on according to this legend. I mean, I'll say Midrash, but it's really, again, it's from a later source. Definitely the source we get it from comes from a Greco-Roman period. But well, let's keep going.
My father, seeing me downcast, asked to know the cause of my sadness, and I replied that I was suffering with my liver. But in truth, I was mourning more than all my brethren, seeing that I had been the cause of Joseph's sale. And when we went down into Egypt and Joseph bound me as a spy, I was not grieved, for I knew in my heart that my suffering was just retribution. But Joseph was good. The Spirit of God dwelt within him. Compassionate and merciful as he was, he bore me no resentment for my evil deeds toward him, but he loved me with the same love he showed the others. He paid due honor to us all and gave us gold and cattle and produce. And now, my dear children, do you love one another, each one his brother, with a clean heart, and remove the spirit of jealousy from the midst of you.
Okay, so the important thing, of course, is that he learned something from this, and he wants to teach his own children not to be jealous of each other. Of course, Simon is held hostage after the situation of going down there and again, he puts himself in prison, as the brother that's held back. He according to this version of the story, that he willingly kind of does this because he knows that he's the brother most responsible for Joseph to be a slave in the first place. So, he has this, he goes through this repentance, and he understands that this is, this is kind of justice, if you will, is retribution. Any comments or questions about this so far? Because again, you're going to see some stuff in this text. So far, pretty much, it's kind of can be like a regular midrash. We did see the thing about the devil and an angel, kind of just referenced without much explanation. We're going to see some other stuff here that kind of gives away that this is not your traditional midrash, if you will. That this is not quite as Jewish as some of the other midrashim that we've been reading over the last few weeks, in the sense that, you know, it's traditional rabbinic Judaism. You're going to start seeing some stuff that you're going to go, where'd that come from? And we'll talk about where it comes from, but here we go.
Like Reuben, so also Shimon adjured his beware of unchastity. For this vice is the mother of all evil. It separates man from God and abandons him to Behar. These were the closing words of his exhortation. In the writings of Enoch, I saw that your sons would be corrupted through unchastity, and they would maltreat the sons of Levi with the sword. But they will not be able to do anything against Levi. For the war he will wage is the war of the Lord, and he will vanquish all your armies. As a small remnant, you will be scattered among Levi and Judah, and none among you will rise to be a judge or a king of our people, as my father Jacob prophesied in his blessing.
So what was that about? Well, I know Rosemary knows, because she knows this stuff, right? But yeah, what is going on there? What's he talking about there, right? In the writings of Enoch.
Is that the one where they chop up the woman and send her pieces out to all the tribes?
No, but that's good. No, that would be no, that's in the future. No, this is in the past.
Oh.
The writings of Enoch are Enoch, the descendant
yeah. Okay.
of Adam, of that, and the antediluvian patriarch, if you will, the guy that kind of been between Adam and Noah, is the one who walks with God and is not, right? And so Enoch has an experience of going to heaven before he dies, and becomes an angel, if you will, becomes almost a divine being. And again, some people look at it, and we didn't have a lot of Enoch literature that made it into rabbinic lore, though there's a little bit. It was definitely, there's a book of Enoch in the pseudepigrapha, actually a few books of Enoch, and there's not one, there's a few books of Enoch, 4, I think, actually. And it is there's interesting speculation about Enoch. And again, in early forms of Christianity, there was also this kind of Jesus is Enoch now come back to the world. So Enoch became a pretty important part of Jewish legend during the Greco-Roman period. And so Enoch had prophecies about what would happen in the future. And of course, they were written after these things had already happened to some extent, but I mean, some of them had, not all of them. But this idea of having Enoch be a guide for us, here we have Enoch kind of, again, laying out what's going to happen to the tribes in the future, and to the Jewish people in the future. And in this case, Enoch is saying, look, way in the future, your tribe, the tribe of Simon, is going to be gone. There's not going to be a tribe of Simon anymore. That they're going to be absorbed into the tribes of Levi and the tribe of Judah, and they won't even be recognizable anymore. And so this is, this is kind of like, oh, and by the way, this is what the future holds for us. So it's kind of scary. I mean, it's not that everybody's going to be gone, but they're talking about things that would happen hundreds and hundreds of years in the future. And what they're talking about in particular is the story of a Simon, a person from the tribe of Simon who commits this deed of pagan a orgy, basically, in the story of Baal Peor, that it's somebody of the tribe of Simon who engages in that, and therefore, is kind of an example of a bad person of the tribe of Simon. And it's a Levite. It's Pinchas who kills him, and that is kind of, again, we don't have a lot about Simon in the Bible, but we do have that story. So that is, well, there's one more paragraph about Simon.
Having completed his admonitions to his sons, Shimon passed away and was gathered to his fathers at the age of 120 years. His sons placed him in a coffin made of imperishable wood so that they might carry his bones to Hebron, as they did in secret during the war between the Egyptians and the Canaanites. Thus did all the tribes during the war. They took the remains, each of its founder, from Egypt to Hebron. Only the bones of Joseph remained in Egypt until the Israelites went out of the land, for the Egyptians guarded them in their royal treasure chambers. Their magicians had warned them that whenever Joseph's bones should be removed from Egypt, a great darkness would envelop the whole land, and it would be a dire misfortune for the Egyptians, for none would be able to recognize his neighbor, even with the light of a lamp.
Yep. And so according to this version, it is only Joseph that doesn't get taken back out of after he dies. And it's only Joseph who has to be buried when the Israelites all leave. Again, we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us what happens to where the other brothers are buried. But again, this kind of little paragraph answers that, which is that the Egyptians believed that whenever Joseph's bones would leave, it would be bad for the whole land. Of course, that happens before they leave, right? The plagues happen, and specifically the plague of darkness happened just before they left. So maybe the Egyptian magicians really didn't get it that wrong. They just knew that when Joseph leaves, it's going to be dark. They didn't maybe get it exactly right. It's going to happen a few weeks before, not when it happens. But in their minds, as soon as it leaves, it's going to happen. So they weren't 100% wrong, the Egyptian magicians, on that. But they didn't want to have Joseph's body out of the country, so much so that the Egyptians guarded it and had it in a special tomb, like a pyramid or something like that, right? The treasure chamber, they said. Pretty wild. Pretty wild. All right, so now Levi, the third oldest son. Here we go.
The ascension of Levi. When it was disclosed to Levi that he was about to die, he gathered all his children around him to tell them the story of his life. And he also prophesied to them what they would do and what would happen to them until the judgment day. He spoke, "When we were pasturing the flocks in Abel Meholah, the spirit of understanding of the Lord came upon me, and I saw all mankind, how they corrupt their ways, and that injustice builds up walls for herself, and impiety sits enthroned upon the towers. And I fell to grieving over the generations of men, and I prayed to the Lord to save me. Sleep enshrouded me, and I beheld a tall mountain, and lo, the heavens opened, and an angel of God addressed me and said, 'Levi, enter.' I entered the first heaven, and I saw a great sea hanging there, and further on I saw a second heaven, brighter and more resplendent than the first. I said to the angel, 'Why is this so?' And the angel said to me, 'Marvel not at this, for you shall see another heaven, brilliant beyond compare. And when you have ascended there, you shall stand near the Lord, and you shall be his minister and declare his mysteries to men. And of the Lord's portion shall be your life, and he shall be your field and vineyard and fruits and gold and silver.'" Then the angel explained the uses of the different heavens to me. and all that happens in each, and he proclaimed the judgment day. He opened the gates of the third heaven, where I beheld the holy temple and God seated upon the throne of glory. The Lord spoke to me, Levi, upon you I have bestowed the blessing of the priesthood until I come and dwell in the midst of Israel. Then the angel carried me back to earth and gave me a shield and a sword, saying, execute vengeance upon Shechem for Dinah, and I will be with you, for the Lord has sent me. I asked the angel what his name was, and he replied, I am the angel that intercedes for the people of Israel, that it may not be destroyed utterly, for every evil spirit attacks it.
Okay, so let's pause. Let's pause right there, just for a quick second. So again, these are Levi's earlier experiences of going to heaven, learning about the mysteries. Let's say that mysteries of God, and what he learns from these things. Again, it definitely is from a period of time. Again, we assume about 2,000 years ago, Greco-Roman period. We really don't have versions of this that have not been annotated or kind of added to by the church, but it doesn't matter. I mean, Ginsburg tried to get to the Jewish elements of this and try to show us what would have been, if not normal Jewish beliefs at this time, fairly consistent with what we know about what Jewish beliefs were. This could have happened, okay? But this concept that there are angels that protect different nations, and that we have an angel that is our angel, protecting, guardian angel as Jews, is really important, because there were a lot of Jews who believed that at 2,000 years ago. That was kind of standard. That was a standard belief. Lots of people, other peoples, had these kind of ideas that each nation had a different angel or a different star that was their protector, was their representative in the heavens, if you will. And it seems like a lot of Jews believed it too. This story, or this version of it, I mean, some of it we don't have even necessarily like a great biblical hook to put it on. We don't know where this story of Levi pasturing flocks at Abel Meholah, we don't have that in the Bible. That's not in Genesis. There is no story about Levi or the tribes being in Abel Meholah. There's a reference to it much later on in the Bible as a place where, is a place mentioned. Literally, you have to go to the Book of Kings before we see this place named. So we don't know exactly why this is set up here like this, other than we know that Simon and Levi are the ones who execute judgment, if you will, on Shechem after Dinah's rape, and that they go in there killing everybody, all the men. This version of the story, folks, basically says that it was God who wanted them to do it. It's a reading of the story that they were executing God's judgment on them. That it was literally like angelic powers given to them to do this. They get a special shield and sword from heaven to do it. It's pretty wild. I mean, that's why, again, when we read this in this section of the 12 patriarchs, we realize that there were some beliefs that were at the time that, it's almost hard to find them in the Bible. They almost seem to contradict things in the Bible, but we have them. And what did it mean for people who are reading this? I mean, if you're a Jew who's reading about Simon and Levi not only being vindicated, but literally being armed by angelic forces, that can lead to some pretty disastrous campaigns against Romans who, you think, hey, God must be on our side when we're fighting. So there are consequences to this, to these stories. I mean, people might have died thinking that they're like Shimon and Levi, fighting on behalf of the Jewish people against people who are always being, the other side is always being essentially being activated by the forces of darkness. Again, there's a lot of similarities to the 12 patriarchs, not so much in the Midrash, traditional Midrash, as there is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essenes, have very similar stories to these kinds of stories that we see in the 12 patriarchs. So let's keep going.
When I awoke, I betook myself to my father, and on the way near Gabal, I found a brass shield such as I had seen in my dream. Then I advised my father and my brother Reuben to bid the sons of Hamor circumcise themselves, for I was quivering with rage on account of the abominable deed they had done. I slew Shechem first of all, and then Simon slew Hamor, and all my other brothers came out and destroyed the whole city. Our father took this in ill part, and in his blessing he remembered our conduct. Although we did a wrong thing in acting thus against his wishes, yet I recognized it to be the judgment of God upon the people of Shechem on account of their sins. And I said to my father, "Be not wroth, my lord, for God will exterminate the Canaanites through this, and he will give you the land to you and to your seed after you. Henceforth, Shechem will be called the city of imbeciles. For as a fool is mocked at, so we have made a mockery of them."
Folks, this is a different reading of the story than we have traditionally in the text itself, in the Bible itself, and in the most of the traditional Midrash. But I think it really does reflect what some Jews believed to be the situation with regards to people who needed to be, people who were on the other side and people who needed to be punished. This story, again, kind of, this version of the Shechem story basically says what the brothers did wrong was they didn't listen to their dad, but they didn't do anything wrong in executing all the men of the city. That's what you just read. It wasn't that they did anything wrong. It's just they didn't listen to their dad, and so they went against his wishes. And their words to their dad are essentially, "It's okay, Dad. This is what we're going to do to the rest of the Canaanites too." It's pretty wild. It's definitely not what we normally read in Midrash. It's definitely not usually the rabbinic take on that story.
Were the people that wrote this kind of aiming that at the rabbis?
I don't think they're aiming it at the rabbis. I think these are people who
are they saying, well, or whoever's telling them, no, we shouldn't fight the Romans?
Oh, it could be that their vision of the rabbis and mainstream Judaism is like Jacob, which is, you guys are pacifists. You guys are trying to say that this isn't going to work out for us. Hey, listen, this is the way we're going to win this war as a whole, by being vengeful and by doing doing the right thing, which in this case is exterminating everybody. You could see that, the justification that meant that mentality that these Essenes, or maybe not even Essenes, but the far radical, Sicarii, the zealots, what they would do occasionally is they would kill a Roman garrison. They'd wipe out a Roman garrison at night. They'd come into a Roman, a small Roman force of 10, 15 guys, kill them, murder them, and then the Romans would counter by wiping out the nearest Jewish village of 1,000,
Mhm.
taking the people into slavery, and that would just create a cycle of violence that how do you read it? And the Jews would read it as, look, this is what we have to continue to do. Whereas the other people are saying, you're just getting us killed. There's no end to this. So this was written, from what we can tell, at a time when people were frustrated, hopeless, and in some cases making the situation worse, at least from the rabbi's point of view. This was not something they wanted to encourage people. They didn't want to encourage people doing this, which is, it doesn't seem like God is rewarding us for killing people, but they thought eventually it would work out that way. They were wrong. They were 100% wrong, because we didn't win by defeating the Romans militarily. That is for sure. So again, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up on what you said about Ginsburg, the way that Ginsburg put this text together. Are you saying that the original text had Christian elements?
No, the original text didn't have Christian elements. The original text didn't, but the versions that we have little Christian interpolations, where they're put in a little thing here and there. He just took it back out. So
it's like Josephus had Christian interpolations added, and then people take them out.
Now we generally don't take them out, but we'll put like a little. We'll
put them in red or something.
Parentheses around it and go, this doesn't sound like he put that there.
Right.
And again, it's just a matter of understanding that, look, there's a reason why the Christian church kept them. And, part of the deal with it was that they were going to put stuff on it. And if 99% of it was untouched, what are you going to do? Throw the whole thing out and say, it's pretty obvious where the stuff was put. In this case, it's very obvious, and I'll tell you how, Rosemary, is because we have versions. The versions we have of the 12 patriarchs, we have a version in Greek, which we assume is like the earliest version, but we also have versions that were in Slavonic, and we also have an Armenian version of it, and we can tell which ones were put in by the church, because they're the ones that are consistent, the ones that were not adapted by the church. The church pieces were all put in. Not all, and in not all cases they were put in. There were parts that are not in the Slavonic version that were in the Greek version, and it's obviously, the Slavonic version was kept before was. You can see that part wasn't adulterated, so it's easy to see it wasn't in that version. Oh, well, then we can pretty much say that this Greek version that we have was put in by some church scribe, some monk or whatever, put that in. It's not in the Slavonic version, so it was pretty easy to do. It wasn't that hard to kind of reconstruct what the original version of this looked like. But unfortunately, again, we have those other versions of it. We have no reason to believe, by the way, that it was ever written in Hebrew. I mean, some people have argued for Hebrew versions of this, but we have no reason to believe that it was ever written in fact in a first version in Hebrew. Was it based on other Hebrew legend? For sure. For Aramaic and Hebrew texts and stuff that we have in the Midrash? Absolutely. There's parts of this that are clearly Midrash, but there's other parts that they were not ever written ever. There's no version of some of this ever written in Hebrew, including some of the stuff about Enoch. And then you're going to see some other stuff that you're like, where did that even come from? And it was probably written from a fairly late date, when the writer never even attempted to base it on a Hebrew or Aramaic text, which is okay. Be like if I read it's like when Anita Diamant wrote the Red Tent. She based some of it on traditional Midrash, and she based some of it on her own imagination. We wouldn't say, oh, well, the part that's her imagination isn't legitimate. We just say, oh, she didn't need a Hebrew text to base that on. And maybe one could make the argument that her writings are based on being a 20th 21st century American Jewish woman and having the feelings that she does from that cultural environment that she wrote from. And we would go, makes sense. That's her take on it, and she can write about it from her vantage point. So I think there were Jews that were Greco-Roman Jews who were influenced by Greek mythology and Greek stories and had their take on this stuff that earlier writers wouldn't have had. And it's pretty cool. To me, it's kind of neat. I like it. I'd like to imagine that I would have written something like this if I had lived during that period, but I probably would have had some weird beliefs too. So this is yeah. I went too far. Here we go.
When we journeyed to Bethlehem and had been abiding there 70 days, another vision was vouchsafed me, like the former. I saw 7 men clad in white, and they spoke to me, saying, "Rise up and array yourself in the priestly garments, set the crown of righteousness upon your head, and put on the ephod of understanding, and the robe of truth, and the mitre plate of faith, and the mitre of dignity, and the shoulder pieces of prophecy." And each of the men brought a garment to me, and invested me with it, and spoke, "Henceforth be the priest of the Lord, you and your seed, unto eternity. And you shall eat all that is lovely to look upon, and the table of the Lord your descendants will appropriate for themselves. And from them will come high priests, judges, and scholars, for all that is holy will be guarded by their mouth."
Keep going.
2 days after I was visited by this dream, Judah and I repaired to our grandfather Isaac, who blessed me in accordance with the words I had heard. Jacob also had a vision, and he saw too that I was appointed to be the priest of God, and through me he set apart 1/10 of his possessions to the Lord. And when we established ourselves in Hebron, the residence of Isaac, our grandfather taught me the law of the priesthood and admonished me to hold myself aloof from unchastity.
All right. So that is the story of how Levi learned that he was going to be the ancestor of the priests. That's a pretty wild dream. And for those who've read the Book of Mormon and some of those other works of religious, I don't know what you'd call them, visions and things about people taking on really big priestly powers. This is consistent with those kinds of stories. Probably, again, since they existed well before the Book of Mormon and some of those other books, most likely, again, these are what those kinds of stories are based on. But this is pretty wild. This is Levi having a kind of a heavenly preview of what's going to happen to the Kohanim later on, after from Aaron on down. So this is what's going to happen to his descendants, and then of course later on, the high priests and the priests are going to have tremendous power. I mean, by the time of the Maccabees and beyond, I mean, they're essentially like kings. So this vision is pretty powerful, and it's one that the Levites would have read or wrote, if you will. They would have looked at this as really good evidence and the basis for their power. That this is something that God has chosen for them to take on, and that their ancestor Levi gets a sneak peek of what this stuff's gonna look like for them. And according to this, what's interesting is that after he has that vision, that Levi then talks to his grandfather Isaac and tells him about it. And Isaac is excited about it because he knows that Levi is going to indeed be the ancestor of the priests. And then, of course, Jacob, it says, has a vision too. And he knows that, that everything is going to be really great for his son, Levi, that he's going to be the ancestor for the prophets. So he gets all the robes and the ephod and the shoulder pieces, breastplate, all this stuff that eventually will come to the priests. We don't know a lot about Levi and why, this son who was also responsible with Shimon for the death of the people of Shechem. There seems to be a discrepancy between that kind of guy and the guy who's going to be the ancestor of the priests. And so they have to be brought together. I mean, there has to be a place where those characteristics and that individual can be synthesized together. And you get it in these stories, because we know that the Bible tells us about the death of the Shechemites, the murder of the Shechemites, the vengeance against the Shechem, whatever you want to say. And we also know that Levi is the ancestor of Moses and of Aaron. So we have both of those things. How do we get to that common ancestor? It means that the Levites, have this interesting ancestor, this person, and we don't know a lot about. We don't know a lot about what is going on here, because we don't know a lot about Levi in the Bible. But let's read what we've got here.
At the age of 28 years, I took Milcah to wife, and she bore me a son, and I named him Gershom, because we were strangers in the land. But I perceived he would not be in the first ranks of men. My second son was born to me in my 35th year, and he saw the light of the world at sunrise, and I beheld him in a vision standing among the proud of the assembly, and therefore I gave him the name Kohat. The third son my wife bore me in the 40th year of my life, and I called his name Merari, because bitter had been her travail in bearing him. My daughter, Jochebed, was born in Egypt when I was 63 years old, and I called her thus because I was known honorably among my brethren in those days. And in my 94th year, Amram took Jochebed to wife, he that was born on the same day with her.
Yeah. This kind of gets to an interesting thing about Levi. We don't know Levi's. We don't really understand Levi's. We don't know Levi's wife. We don't get a name for her. Here, her name is given to be Milcah. That's her. It's a missing name. So we get that. And then it's going to give us the sons. The Bible does give us these. Gershom, Kohat, and Merari. Those are the sons of Levi. Those are also given later on. Later on, we get that list of the sons as clans, as groups in the book of Numbers, as the way the tribes are broken up. The tribe of Levi is broken up further by, again, these distinctions of the sons of Levi, again with Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. Now, here's the issue. Who is Yocheved? Yocheved, we read in the Bible that Amram, who's Kohat's son, so Gershon, Kohat, Merari, Kohat is the middle son. Kohat has a son named Amram. Amram is very important because, of course, he's the father of Moses. Now, here's the thing. The Bible does say that Amram married his aunt. Well, that seems strange because, again, that would be a huge age discrepancy normally between a man and his own aunt. So this version of the story, this midrash, if you will, explains how that happened, which is that he has a daughter when he's 63 years old. Yocheved, which in Hebrew means God's honor. And so he says, I called her Yocheved because I was known honorably by my brothers in those days. And so what it means is that she was born so late, like 20, 30 years later, that when Amram, Kohat's son, was born, that his aunt was roughly the same age as he was. And so in my 94th year, it says, Amram took Yocheved to wife, he that was born on the same day with her. So not only, again, are they roughly the same age, they are born on the same day. It's not normal for a person to marry their aunt. I want to make that very clear. It's not a legal Jewish marriage by the time that this was written. But there is this understanding that they're in Egypt. What's he going to do? What are his marriage partners are limited because he's not supposed to be marrying Egyptians. And so he married essentially almost like a cousin of his, which would have been okay. So that's what you just read. You read an answer for kind of the genealogy of Levi that would allow for his daughter to marry his grandson. That's what you just read. Again, the reason we have that at all is because one of those kids is Moses. Moses is the offspring of this union. Folks, I'm going to tell you there's another big possibility, which is that Moses is born many generations after they come to Egypt, and whether it was an aunt or a cousin, there are more Jews than a family of 70, 100 by this point. But that's also not what we have in the Bible, which is that there are only a few generations that have elapsed between when they came to Egypt and when they're going to leave Egypt. So that goes back again to that issue of how many years were they really in Egypt for? How many generations were they in Egypt for? Were they there for hundreds of years, or were they there for a few generations? That's a story for another time. But that's why we have this midrash, this explanation for how Amram ends up marrying his aunt. So that is. By the way, the line in the Torah is that Amram took to wife a daughter of Levi. Now, does it literally mean a daughter of Levi, or could it have been a descendant of Levi? So, I mean, that's what I'm kind of getting at. Most people take it literally that it was a daughter, literally, of Levi, but that is again, that's traditional. There's nothing unusual about this. This is from the Testament of Levi, and this is as we have it. But we do have this weird genealogy of Moses that here's an answer. All right.
Thereupon Levi admonished his children to walk in the ways of the Lord and fear him with all their heart. And he told them what he had learned from the writings of Enoch, that his descendants would sin against the Lord in times to come, and they would suffer the divine punishment for their transgression, and then God would raise up a new priest unto whom all the words of the Lord would be revealed. His last words were, And now, my children, you have heard all I have to say. Choose now, light or darkness, the law of the Lord or the works of Beliar. And his sons made answer, before the Lord we will walk according to his law. Then Levi spoke, the Lord is witness, and the angels are witnesses. I am witness, and you are witnesses concerning the word of your mouth. And his sons replied, we are witnesses. Thus Levi ceased to admonish his sons. He stretched out his feet and was gathered to his fathers at the age of 137 years, a greater age than any of his brothers attained.
Interesting. So he lives a longer lifespan than any of his brothers. It doesn't mean that he's the last to die, because he's considerably older than some of his brothers, including, by the way, his brother Joseph. But he lives 137 years, which is, again, according to this version, this explanation of the brothers, is he lives the longest. You can make the argument why do they come up with that? Because he's the ancestor of Moses, and he's an ancestor of Aaron, and the tribe of Levi is the tribe of the Levites, and the tribe of the Kohanim, the tribe of the priests. So he's given this really long lifespan. And again, according to this, he tells his family before he dies, you better do the right thing. You better be the teachers of light that the priests are supposed to be. And so this is an interesting kind of responsibility, which is not just you're carrying on the legacy of the Jewish people, but you have to be there. You're going to be the priests. You're going to be the people who are going to be responsible for the religious leadership of our people. And so you better pick the right way. And again, here it says the choices between God or Beliar or Belial, which is, again, another way of saying the ways of darkness, the ways of the devil, which again seems to be kind of another example of this kind of dualistic theology that by this point was somewhat acceptable, of the fight against darkness, that the children of light versus the children of darkness. I mean, you kind of see this here in this text. You don't get it in the Torah. You don't get these in the Bible. You don't get light, the fight against darkness, light or darkness, choose a side. You don't get that dualism in the Bible. You do obviously in Christianity. You do in the books of the Essenes and the what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you get it in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and in some of this Greco-Roman period Jewish Midrash, which is very influenced by this dualistic view of the universe. This is it's pretty well. All right, this is now moving to the next son. Rosemary? Oh, Rosemary's gone. She is going to be back in a second. Judith, you texted me something. I didn't understand what you texted me. Judith.
Many years ago when we were studying, you said something about the Torah being the backstory / contract between the Israelites and another group.
Oh yeah, the Levites. Yeah.
Yeah, to have them be their priests.
Yep.
But that they weren't necessarily the related.
Well, they might have been related, but they may not have. The theory is that the Levites, when they come into the land of Israel, so this is the full theory on it. When the Israelites come into, or when some Israelites, okay. So the theory is that Moses' tribe, the Levites, are the main bulk, or maybe the only people that come into the land of Israel during the Exodus period. And this goes to the fact that there doesn't seem to be as many people that come into the land during this period by archaeological record, that there doesn't seem to be a mass wave of people that displace another people during this time of the Exodus. But it is possible that some people came in, and that maybe there were Israelites or people who had originally come from the land of Canaan who came into the land, and that the stories of the tribes and the story of the Levites is really one to synthesize and bring these tribes together and allow them to kind of live together. And so that the Levites were not given a property, a place to actually live in the land of Israel, but they were spaced out amongst everybody and given this role to be priests in order so that they could kind of be accommodated, but at the same time not displace everybody. The theory behind this, which is the biblical scholar Baruch Halpern, who's kind of the advocate for this theory, he basically says, look, there seems to be a truth to the story of the Exodus. It seems to be like there seems to be something there, but we don't have it archaeologically. But if you read the Torah carefully, there does seem to be this really, really very concerted effort, let's put it that way, to accommodate the Levites, to give them a place amongst the people, but at the same time, like, not give them any land. And so the theory is that maybe they did come in, led by Moses and some other people, and they were kind of given a place back amongst the people and kind of focused on these stories, these tribal stories that kind of established why these people are all related. And that's why Genesis kind of establishes that. I mean, that's the theory. That's the theory behind it. And it's trying to kind of reconcile the archaeological evidence with the Torah itself. So
Okay.
that is what I will tell you. You know, a lot of biblical historians just look at it and say, look, it's pretty clear that there wasn't a huge difference between the Israelites and the Canaanites. That to say that the Israelites are different than the Canaanites, we just don't have the archaeological evidence to back that up. So that's the other extreme, which is that the Israelites were just literally a group of Canaanites who said, you know, we're not like these people anymore. That we're breaking off from the Canaanite majority and saying we don't live like this anymore. That's the other possibility. Again, from the archaeology, it's not the case from the Torah. The Torah tells a much different story. It tells the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But if we don't have that story and we just have the archaeology and the language, we have a lot of similarities culturally and physically and archaeologically between the Canaanites and Hebrews. We don't really have a huge difference between them. And so the feeling is that how could this all work together? But that's kind of what it comes from. This, how do we synthesize the archaeology with the Torah, with what we have in the Torah? And it was done by a Jewish scholar. I mean, I want to make it clear. Baruch Halpern is a Jewish, in case you didn't know by his name, he's a Jewish scholar. He's not like some previous Christian scholars who, quite frankly, could care less whether the Jewish story was respected or preserved. They just didn't really care. It wasn't their goal to try to make Jews feel comfortable with what the Torah says. And again, there is a scientific element to this, which is, let's just look at the evidence. Let's just look at with what we have in front of us, and there's a place for that, which is, it's called science, and I like science. Science is not my enemy. Science is not my enemy. So I like hearing what the evidence actually says, and trying to understand maybe there's a reason why we have maybe there's another reason why we have these stories, which is to give people a reason not to live like the Canaanites in a positive way. I mean, in a positive way, they say, hey, look, you know what? Let's stop sacrificing our children. And we know from the archaeology that the Canaanites did that. I mean, I have no issue saying from being morally judgmental about sacrificing the children. I'm not in favor.
You're not a fan? You're not a fan.
I don't want to justify it.
Depends on the children. Yeah.
It depends on. I wasn't going to say that, but yes, it's
A question.
Yeah.
A question.
Yeah.
The red tent was widely read at the time. Comparatively, how widely read was the Midrash at the time?
Some of it. So that's an interesting question. This stuff doesn't seem to have been, at least 12 patriarchs didn't seem to have as much impact on the Jewish community.
This particular portion?
Yeah, this section that we're reading, the 12 patriarchs, there's definitely overlap. There's places where it overlaps with traditional texts, right? Traditional Jewish legend. But there's other places where it didn't have a big impact. We don't see it popping up. We don't see references to it. We don't see it popping up in other later Jewish sources. So some of it was forgotten. Some of it was. Some of it just wasn't. Some of it just wasn't kept. In the back of my mind, I was also going to say, I wonder how much of it had to do with the fact that once Christianity came on the scene, that there were texts that people saw as the texts that kind of were the Testament texts are definitely those texts that kind of are like the Dead Sea Scrolls. It didn't matter. We didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls. We didn't have that literature. But I wonder if some of the literature wasn't studied or didn't get preserved, didn't get kept, because people saw it as too Christological. I wonder amongst Jewish, the rabbis and the earlier Jewish, arbiters of what's going to be canon, what's going to be kept, and what's going to be studied, and what's going to be discussed, whether there wasn't an attempt at saying, hey, you know what, that sounds a little bit too much like the Christian stuff, and we're not going to keep that. I mean, some of it didn't matter. It was established Jewish legend, and it was going to be there. But I think some of it might have been a little too Christological, and they would have said, you know what, that doesn't sound Jewish, because I think at a certain point they forgot that there were these common elements that were Jews, and they weren't Christians. They just had closer beliefs to what Christians would eventually have too.
But what about the earlier material? Was it widely read?
Yeah, it was. It seems to be really, if not widely read, widely known, because
Widely known.
in some cases, the Midrash actually would help people understand the text, right, and fill in the blanks and help them rectify problems with it. So they like that. But I also think that there's always this folk legend level to things that people enjoyed, and I think they liked having stories that were entertaining and that were visual and that were fun. I think people liked those stories.
Right.
My guess is that people have always liked good stories, and just like we need fiction, and even when the fiction touches on is more satire and is more political commentary or social commentary, we like it because there's a level of escapism and entertainment to it that I think people have always liked. I think human beings have always liked to have people entertain them and make them laugh.
Story is very.
Yeah, I think people my guess is that people always like that story. I mean, to some extent, that's the Torah. I mean, to some extent, and people have made this argument that the reason that they I guess it's probably more of a modern take on it, but there are people who say, look, if the Torah was simply a covenantal code, a law code, nobody would have paid attention to it. But because there's that great backstory to it, people said, oh yeah, let's pay attention to this. Let's continue to read it, because it gives us a picture of people, and we connect with them, and they're exciting, and it's fun to read. Let's jump into it, and the kids will pay attention to it. And I think people, the problem, of course, is that once it becomes canon, then people go, but I don't want to believe in the crossing of the Red Sea. I don't want to believe in, I don't want to believe in Samson, And so people, they focused on the wrong part, which was what we didn't keep those stories so that you would pay attention to those stories like they're the word of God. We wanted you to pay attention to the covenant, to that code part where it talked about what you were supposed to do. So you didn't need a Samson, and you didn't need to have God send stuff down, rain fire on people. So they missed the point. They wanted the story to be the word of God, and not the very clearly covenantal pieces where this is the agreement, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what God wants you to do. And people their eyes start glazing over whenever you even get to that part, which is the law, the part that they were actually supposed to do, not the story part. But yeah, that's much more of a modern take on it, I would say, from the last 50 years of it, where it's not even a religious issue anymore. It's not even this is Christian, this is Jewish, this is law, no, what's the purpose of it? And people are starting to say, yeah, maybe the covenant part was really the heart of this, but the story was there so that you pay attention to it, and that you'd read it and study it, and not necessarily that's the part that you got to get hung up on. That's definitely kind of I'd say the last generation or two, people starting to think about that. Maybe it's also reflective of how we read stories today, and how we kind of understand the purpose of narrative and psychology too, I guess, maybe. But all right, well, let's read Judah's. We'll at least get through. I know we'll get through Judah's story here.
Judah warns against greed and unchastity. The last words addressed by Judah to his sons were the following: I was the fourth son begotten by my father, and my mother called me Judah, saying, I thank the Lord that he has given me a fourth son. I was zealous in my youth and obedient to my father in all things. When I grew up to manhood, he blessed me, saying, you will be king and prosper in all your ways. The Lord granted me his grace in whatever I undertook, in the field and in the house. I could speed as swiftly as the hind and overtake it, and prepare a dish of it for my father. A deer I could catch on the run, and all the animals of the valley. A wild mare I could outstrip, hold it and bridle it. A lion I slew and snatched a kid from its jaws. A bear I caught by the paw and flung it down the cliff, and it lay beneath, crushed. I could keep pace with a wild boar and overtake it, and as I ran, I seized it and tore it to pieces. A leopard sprang at my dog and have run, and I grasped its tail and hurled it away from me, and its body burst on the coast at Gaza. A wild steer I found grazing in the field. I took it by its horns, swung it round and round until it was stunned, and then I cast it to the ground and killed it.
Yep. Well, you can see Judah is like a lion, right?
All Bunyan up.
Yeah, I'm like a lion, right? Judah is like a lion. These are the kind of things that lions do. Or I guess imagine a lion would do this. Yep.
Judah did not conceal his shortcomings either. He confessed how drunkenness and passion had betrayed him first into marriage with a Canaanitish woman, and then into improper relations with his daughter-in-law Tamar. He said to his children, "Do not walk after the desire of your hearts, and vaunt not the valiant deeds of your youth. This too is evil in the eyes of the Lord. For while I boasted that the face of a beautiful woman had never allured me in the wars, and reviled my brother Reuben for his transgression with Bilhah, the spirit of passion and unchastity gained possession of me, and I took Bathshua to wife, and trespassed with Tamar, though she was the affianced of my son. First I said to Bathshua's father, I will take counsel with my father Jacob to know whether I should marry your daughter. But he was a king, and he showed me an untold heap of gold accredited to his daughter, and he adorned her with the magnificence of woman in gold and pearls, and he bade her pour the wine at the meal. The wine turned my eyes awry, and passion darkened my heart. In mad love for her, I violated the command of the Lord and the will of my father, and I took her to wife. The Lord gave me a recompense according to the counsel of my heart, for I had no joy in the sons she bore me."
Yeah, that is the story of Bathshua. Other than the fact that, and again, we mentioned this before when we read about this story, in the way the Midrash teaches that, who again, that Judah, this was not something he should have done. The sons that he has with Bathshua is, these are the sons that are Er and Onan and Shelah. And again, when Er and Onan both die, he doesn't marry her to Shelah, his youngest son. That's Tamar, was supposed to, again, marry the last son. He basically here, in this version of the story, this text, he basically says he never should have married her in the first place. He was drunk, and he didn't do what he was supposed to do, in the fact that he was not supposed to marry a Canaanite woman. There are what happened to these tribes? What happened to the descendants of Judah? I mean, we know we're the descendants of Judah, but we don't know anything about these older two sons, Er and Onan, who seem to not have been good people. And again, there's something worth mentioning again, that Bathshua sounds very close to Bathsheba. As a matter of fact, if Bathshua is vocalized differently, the Vav, it comes out to Bathsheba. So it's very close to Bathsheba, who is the woman that Judah's descendant, King David, engages in a relationship with illegally. Ends up killing Bathsheba's husband, and ends up having a son with her. The first son dies, but the next son, Solomon, ends up being the king of the Jewish people. But I mean, the story of Bathsheba and David is one of the, it's one of the really kind of problematic stories in the Bible, and is just a little foretaste to it. I mean, it's not a coincidence. It's if anything, a foreshadow, and maybe again intentionally written as an explanation for why King David again is kind of following in the line of his ancestor Judah. Here again, nothing good came of this relationship. It says flat out, and then again he ends up having twin sons with Tamar, and those are our ancestors. Well, anyways, let's read the story the way it's presented here.
"And now, my children, I pray you, do not intoxicate yourselves with wine, for wine twists the understanding away from the truth and confuses the sight of the eyes. Wine led me astray, so that I felt no shame before the throngs of people in the city. And I turned aside and went into Tamar in the presence of them, and committed a great sin. And though a man be a king, if he leads an unchaste life, he loses his kingship. I gave Tamar my staff, which is the stay of my tribe, and my girdle cord, which is power, and my signet diadem, which is the glory of my kingdom. I did penance for all this, and to old age I drank no wine and ate no flesh and knew no sort of pleasure. Wine causes the secret things of God and man to be revealed to the stranger. Thus did I disclose the commands of the Lord and the mysteries of my father Jacob to the Canaanite woman Bathsheba, though God had forbidden me to betray them. I also enjoin you not to love gold and not to look upon the beauty of women, for through money and through beauty I was led astray to Bathsheba the Canaanite. I know that my stock will fall into misery through these two things, for even the wise men among my sons will be changed by them. And the consequences will be that the kingdom of Judah will be diminished, the domain that the Lord gave me as a reward for my obedient conduct toward my father. For never did I speak in contradiction of him, but I did all things according to his words.
Wait, let's pause. Let's pause right there because before we get too far away from what we just read, Judah tells his descendants, "Don't drink." Right? Drinking got me in a lot of trouble, but it goes beyond that. Understand that looking on the beauty of women and love and money are going to be a problem. This is what his takeaway from his own life is. Now, again, we only read about the fact that he seems to be desiring to have a woman so much that he sleeps with Tamar thinking that she's a prostitute. That's all we get in the Bible. This Midrash basically tells us that he was drunk, which is why he does both things, that he kind of is led by his passions because of alcohol, but even more so, it led him to tell them secrets that he wasn't supposed to say, and that because of his love of money, he married the woman in the first place. He married the daughter of Shua. He married Bathsheba in the first place. So he basically says, these are my weaknesses, right? I have these weaknesses, and they're really bad, and they're going to be really bad for you. And he warns them not to fall prey to those weaknesses. And it says that he actually gave up women and alcohol. It also, by the way, says he gave up meat. Yeah, it says he gave up meat, flesh. And I mean, specifically that he knew no sort of pleasure, which we assume is physical pleasure of sexual enjoyment. But I mean, this is a pretty serious warning, and also, this isn't giving them up for Yom Kippur or giving them up for 40 days. It says he gave them up for the rest of his life. So it doesn't seem like an exceptionally very Jewish thing to do. But, remember, Judah's saying, I know my descendants, and specifically people like King Solomon, are going to get into a lot of trouble because of their inability to control themselves. And that's why he says, I know that my stock will fall into misery because of these things, because of money and beauty. All right. So
when he says that he gave away the secrets, is that someone trying to account for parallel texts? Would the Jews be aware by now that some things they thought were maybe exclusively Jewish were also known to other people?
I think it really reflects in this case, in this Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, there was this idea that there is a secret wisdom that the Jews had, that they have shared, they've it's gone to other people that shouldn't have it, which is, I think, reflective again of this kind of almost cultic, belief that there's powers and there's secrets that the Jews have that nobody else has. And you see it in these texts in the 12 patriarchs, and of course you really see it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is that there's secrets that they've either recovered or uncovered, or again recovering them, finding them again, or that the Jews have to work hard at preserving these secrets, otherwise they're going to get out, and that they're going to fall into the wrong hands. The people who have these secrets, just by having them, they'll have power. And so that's this kind of this interesting belief that there is, and we don't really get it again in the rabbinic texts. We don't have that. There isn't this idea that, I mean, it's there, but it's definitely not at the forefront. It's in the background, that there's occasionally, like, there's secrets that aren't for everybody. You definitely get it in the Kabbalistic texts, but you don't really get them so much in the Talmud, and you really don't get them in the Torah. I mean, on the contrary, there seems to be this idea that the Torah is for everybody. That when we read in Netzavina, one of my favorite lines, that it's not a secret, it's for everybody. The words are in your mouth, they're in your heart. It's the contrary, it's exact opposite to this kind of, there are these secrets that nobody can get, and if you get them, then they'll have the power, and then if they have the power, then we won't have the power. It's very specific to these groups, and the Essenes definitely had them, which is why they put their texts in these jars and hid them. The only reason you hide your text is because you're afraid they're going to fall into the wrong hands. I mean, there's a mentality there that the Jewish people, for the most part, didn't have. They didn't care who read the Torah. We didn't care. Let everybody read the Torah. Let everybody read the Talmud. It's not a secret. There's nothing here that we're trying to keep to ourselves. Let everybody have it. This is the exact opposite of this type of mentality that you see. Like, when you read this, you know that this was written by these kind of groups that were, number one, fairly nationalistic and fairly distrustful of anybody who wasn't circumcised and who didn't carry the sign of God on them. But yeah, they occasionally thought other Jews, were not in possession of the truth either. So when you read this kind of stuff, those are giveaways. When you read that I gave away the secrets to this person, you're like, oh, that's not rabbinic. Was not mainstream rabbinic stuff. The rabbis didn't like that kind of stuff. They really didn't. They didn't want people to be cut off and to do that stuff. They didn't. Once you do that, once you say, hey, we've got a secret and only we have that secret, you're cutting yourself off from the rest of the community. And the rabbis really didn't like that. That was one of the things that made them what they were, which was not wanting groups they wanted people to be able to be together and not be possessive of like some treasure that is,
As long as they weren't women.
I'm not going to deny that, though. I will tell you, it didn't. Not that it's an apology for it, but it didn't make him different from virtually every other group out there. I mean, there were vessel virgins, but
yes,
not exactly something that a lot of women seem to want to do. But yeah, there were not a lot of options for women in religion, unfortunately, in those days. And again, it's not an apology. I'm not saying that Jews should have gotten away with it, but weren't really different from lots of other people but by this period in human history, or at least in recorded history in the Mediterranean area. Let's be clear about that. There might have been other groups that were not as chauvinistic, but yes, But as we can see, these are guys who are admitting their weaknesses. And their weaknesses weren't just, it wasn't just that their weaknesses were women. It was actually specifically, if you look at it, it was being unchaste and being led by, their carnal desires, if you will. It wasn't just that it was women that were leading them astray, but it was their lust, if you will. It wasn't the women being bad. There are texts like that, but this isn't one of them, and this definitely isn't that women are sapping your strength or making you do bad. It's the greed and the lust and their own desires that are getting them into trouble. Yep.
And Isaac, my father's father, blessed me with a blessing that I should be ruler in Israel, and I know that the kingdom will arise from me. In the books of Enoch the just, I read all the evil that you will do in the latter days. Only beware, my children, of unchastity and greed, for love of gold leads to idolatry, causing men to call them gods that are none, and dethroning the reason of man. On account of gold, I lost my children, and had I not mortified my flesh and humbled my soul, and had not my father Jacob offered up prayers for me, I had died childless. But the God of my fathers, the merciful and gracious one, saw that I had acted unwittingly, for the ruler of deception had blinded me. And I was ignorant, being flesh and blood, and corrupt through sins. And in the moment when I considered myself invincible, I recognized my weakness.
Yep. And there again, another giveaway. No, this part could have also been added by a later writer. The ruler of deception had blinded me, which again is this kind of recognition of a dark side, and specifically of a prince of darkness that was involved in his downfall. But again, whether or not that doesn't seem to be a big part of it. But again, that's why it might have been, the ruler of deception who blinded me easily could have been a later addition, because it doesn't really change. It doesn't really change what happens here, which is that I acted unwittingly, or I was ignorant. I, being flesh and blood and corrupt through sin, my own hubris led to this, led to my being punished, because I thought I was safe from the sins of the body, if you will. That is the unfortunate takeaway from this section, which is that Judah needed to learn. But let's read the last piece here.
Then Judah revealed to his sons in clear, brief words the whole history of Israel until the advent of the Messiah. And his final speech was, "My children, observe the whole law of the Lord. In it is hope for all that keep his ways. I die this day at the age of 119 years before your eyes. None shall bury me in a costly garment, nor shall you cut my body to embalm it, but you shall carry me to Hebron." Having spoken these words, Judah sank into death.
Wow. Okay. Well, pretty similar to some of the previous ones, but well, by the way, he lives 1 year shy of the 120. But what's interesting about this is, there's a lot of interesting stuff in it. He learns the whole history of the Jews until the end of days. Lives 1 year shy of 120, but he tells them not to embalm his body. Unlike the other brothers, or at least Jacob and Joseph, he doesn't want to be embalmed. He wants to be buried back up at Hebron in the cave of Machpelah, but he doesn't want to be embalmed. And specifically, again, not to be buried in any kind of formalities. Don't bury me in a costly garment. Don't do anything fancy. Don't put me in a fancy coffin, any of those kind of things. He wants to be buried very simply like that. And it's interesting because, again, there's a theory that one of the things that made Jewish burials, even for royalty, different was that the royalty was not buried with any special types of treasure. That the body was buried simply, and you wouldn't know whether the person who was buried was a king or a common farmer. That's a really, really different way of burying people, like in anywhere in the world. I mean, we literally, in some cases, we only know about cultures because of how they're buried. I just read, we just discovered this new Anglo-Saxon warlord that was just uncovered. His burial plot was uncovered, and we like now think maybe there was Anglo-Saxon rulers that were more powerful than we thought in this period. Like, it changes the whole. Well, the headline of the story said, this changes what we can know about the history of Britain during the Roman period, the post-Roman period, just from the way a guy is buried and what he's buried with. We wouldn't know that from the Jewish burial of even the kings. We wouldn't know. So it's very interesting. By the way, it also means that when someone was buried, even if they were a king, if they were buried with nothing, no one would disturb their grave. Nobody would run into a Jewish king's burial tomb right away, right after he died, and start disturbing the body and pulling off all his stuff. There was nothing to pull out. So if the Jewish value is to leave a body alone and not to mess with it, which clearly not embalming it is part of that, leaving it alone, don't bury in a lot of treasure and no one will come in and take stuff from it. So all of this kind of is consistent with this idea that Jews just wanted to be buried in a simple burial place and not, just leave them alone, leave the body alone. So interestingly, that is what Judah says. Leave me alone. Don't bury me with anything. Leave my body alone and just let me be buried with my family. Again, how quickly could they have gotten him up from Hebron, back to Hebron from Egypt? One doesn't know, but he doesn't want to be embalmed in the however many days it takes to get there. He doesn't care. He wants to be buried naturally, without any fanfare and without any special stuff. Pretty well. Anybody else?
There was, I think, a couple of years ago, they were excavating a medieval cemetery. I think it was in Leeds. Anyway, it was in Britain. And they found what they thought was a Jewish cemetery. The archaeologists were pretty sure it was Jewish. And then, of course, the Orthodox rabbi said, well, if it's a Jewish gravesite, then you can't excavate it. But then they decided that because there was some metal, I forget whether it was rings or nails, that it couldn't be Jewish, and therefore it was okay for them to excavate it.
I don't remember. I'll try to find it. It is interesting when they find ancient Jewish cemeteries that, again, it's tough to know because there's not going to be a lot of material record, but that's actually kind of what makes it it's almost like, is it Jewish because there isn't any material record? So it's hard to know. It's not easy to know whether or not these cemeteries, these burial areas that we find are Jewish or not. But because, again, there's nothing there. But you can't be 100% certain. I mean, you can't. I don't know. I'm just trying to look it up while you're doing that. Anyways, I'll try to find it. These Jewish cemeteries that they find in some European countries, it's just, yeah, they unless they find a tombstone, they really don't know. But yes, it does go with the Jewish value that you cannot take it with you. And the best is, again, to pass it on. If you're lucky, give it away, give it to charity. At best, you're going to pass it on to your family, but you can't take it with you. It's not going to the next world. All right. Well, we'll read one last son. We'll read about Issachar, one of the sons. When we get into the sons that are not the first four, if you will, we start to get into the ones where we don't know as much about these sons, about these other tribes. But let's read Issachar. We'll finish with this one today.
Issachar's singleness of heart. When Issachar felt his end approach, he summoned his sons and he said to them, "Hearken, my children, unto your father Issachar, and listen to the words of him that is beloved of the Lord. I was born to Jacob as his fifth son, as a reward for the Dudaim. Reuben brought the Dudaim from the field. They were fragrant apples which grew in the land of Haran upon an eminence below a gully. Rachel met Reuben, and she took the Dudaim away from him. The lad wept, and his cries brought his mother Leah to his side, and she addressed Rachel thus, Is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband, and would you take away my son's Dudaim also? And Rachel said, See, Jacob shall be yours tonight for your son's Dudaim. But Leah insisted, Jacob is mine, and I am the wife of his youth. Whereupon Rachel, Be not boastful and overweening. To me he was betrothed first, and for my sake he served our father 14 years. You are not his wife. You were taken to him by cunning instead of me. For our father deceived me and put me out of the way the night of your nuptials, so that Jacob could not see me. Nevertheless, give me the Dudaim, and you may have Jacob for a night."
So what this little midrash does is it takes us back to Rachel and Leah and what's going on with them, which is that the Dudaim, we talked about this before, these are the
mandrakes.
The mandrakes, right? So the mandrakes have special fertility properties, and they're magical. And so by Rachel having these, she's hoping that she'll have a son. But what happens in the story, it's in the Torah, that Leah gets to sleep with Jacob. Rachel basically says, yeah, okay, I'll take the Dudaim, you get to go in and have a baby, and or to have a chance to sleep with him, which becomes Issachar. Issachar is able to, again, come into being because of these Dudaim. So it's a weird story, but again, the Midrash here tells us that this goes back to the rivalry between the two sisters, which again, when Leah says to Rachel, isn't it not enough that my husband loves you? And Rachel says, what are you talking about? You shouldn't be married to him anyways. I was supposed to be his only wife, and so the whole thing is messed up. So again, it reminds us of the backstory and the fact that this was not the way things should have been to some extent. So, and then he's going to explain.
Then Leah bore me, and I was called Issachar on account of a reward Rachel had given to my mother. At that time, an angel of the Lord appeared to Jacob, and he spoke, Rachel will bear only 2 sons, for she rejected the espousal of her husband and chose continence. But Leah bore 6 sons, for the Lord knew that she desired to be with her husband, not because she was prompted by the evil inclination, but for the sake of children. Rachel's prayer also was fulfilled on account of the Dudaim, for although she desired to eat of the apples, she did not touch them, but put them in the house of the Lord and gave them to the priest of the Most High that was in those days.
Huh.
That's weird.
So that is another version of
That's kind of not Jewish, the idea that you should, practice chastity, not even chastity, but withhold yourself from your husband all the time.
Yep. So this is a definitely, where does this come from? And again, it comes from either a period where Jews had no issue saying these kind of things, or again, written after, they'd gone through a Christian redaction. But pretty wild. It's not very common to have these kind of things in Jewish sources, that's for sure. All right, we'll finish. I don't want to leave it off in the middle here, but yeah.
When I grew up, my children, I walked in the integrity of my heart, and I became a husbandman, cultivating the land for my father and my brothers, and I gathered the fruit from the fields in their due time. My father blessed me because he saw that I walked in singleness of heart. I was not married to a wife until I was 30 years old.
Sorry. Yeah.
For the hard work I did consumed my strength, and I had no desire to woman. But overwhelmed by fatigue, I would sink into sleep. My father was well pleased at all times with my rectitude. If my work was crowned with good results, I brought the first fruits of my labor to the priest of the Lord. The next harvest went to my father, and then I thought of myself. The Lord doubled the possessions in my hand, and Jacob knew that God aided me for the sake of my singleness of heart. For in my sincerity, I gave of the produce of the land to the poor and the needy. And now,
Keep going.
And now hearken to me, my children, and walk in singleness of heart, for upon it rests the favor of the Lord at all times. The simple man longs not for gold, he does not defraud his neighbor, he has no desire for meats and dainties of many kinds. He cares not for sumptuous dress, he hopes not for long life, he waits only upon the will of God. The spirits of deception have no power over him, for he looks not upon the beauty of woman, lest he defile his understanding with corruption. Jealousy comes not into his thoughts. Envy does not sear his soul, and insatiable greed does not make him look abroad for rich gain. Now then, my children, observe the law of the Lord, attain to simplicity, and walk in singleness of heart, without meddling with the affairs of others. Love the Lord and love your neighbors. Have pity upon the poor and the feeble. Bow your backs to till the ground. Occupy yourselves with work upon the land, and bring fruits to the Lord in gratitude. For the Lord has blessed you with the best of the fruits of the field, as he has blessed all the saints, from Abel down to our day.
Yep, well, let's read one more paragraph.
Know, my children, that in the latter time your sons will abandon the paths of probity and will be ruled by greed. They will forsake rectitude and practice craft. They will depart from the commands of the Lord and follow after Beliar. They will give up husbandry and pursue their evil plans. They will be scattered among the heathen and serve their enemies. Tell this to your children, so that if they sin, they may repent speedily and return to the Lord. For he is merciful, and he will take them out to bring them back to their land.
Yep, and so Issachar seems to be a good guy. He seems to be a hard worker. What you can say about him is he kind of is like a down-to-earth guy who doesn't worry about wealth and gain, the superficial things, that he gets down to work, donates his stuff back to God. He listens to his father, just kind of like a normal good person. Nothing crazy. Doesn't do anything out of the ordinary. Doesn't live a profligate lifestyle. Any of those kind of things. And he doesn't want his family to do this either. And he says, look, our tribe is going to wind up being scattered. They're not going to continue in these ways, but look, do your best and try to not do the wrong thing. And what can you learn from a guy like Issachar? And again, we don't know that any of his descendants are even reading this right now. Like by the time that this is being written, there are no people that call themselves the descendants of Issachar. There's no tribe of Issachar by the time this is written. That's part of what we're dealing with the rest of these people, because the Levites, the Judites, Shimon, we know, disappears. The Reubenites also disappear too, but there seems to be this kind of, I don't want to say they deserved it, but the Reubenites, we know, were not giving a major portion, but we don't really know that much about them. And the same thing kind of goes with Issachar. Even more so, Issachar doesn't seem to do anything bad in the Bible. Reuben did something bad. Issachar doesn't seem to do anything bad. So here's what he says, Issachar's words. By the way, Issachar has no words in the Torah. Issachar never says anything. There's no word that comes out of Issachar's mouth in the Torah.
I am 122 years old, and I can discern no sin in myself. Save my wife, I have known no woman. I was guilty of no unchastity through the lifting up of eyes. I drank no wine that I might not be led astray. I did not covet what belonged to my neighbor. Guile had no place in my heart. Lies did not pass my lips. I sighed along with all that were heavy laden, and to the poor I gave my bread. I loved the Lord with all my might, and mankind I also loved. Do you likewise, my children, and the spirits of Belial will flee from you. No deed done by the wicked will have power over you, and you will vanquish all the wild beasts. For you have with you the Lord of heaven. And
Okay,
Issachar
finish up.
And Issachar bade his children carry him up to Hebron and bury him there by his fathers in the cave. And he stretched out his feet and fell into the sleep of eternity, full of years, healthy of limb, and in the possession of all his faculties.
And according to this text, what more could you want? Right? You lived 122 years, which is more than the 120 years you get. So you got a little bit more even. You got a little tiny bonus 2 years. But more importantly, he died with the ability to still move, still had possession of his faculties, he had his mind, and he died a good death. And this is what, he tells his family, try to live like me, try to live like, be someone who doesn't, who isn't greedy, doesn't live a life of, as you say, except for my wife, I've known no other woman, right? No unchastity, right? I didn't drink it. He says he didn't drink any wine. And what does he do? He loves God, and he also loves human beings. He loves mankind. And again, this warning that the devil, the spirits, the demons, whatever, will be far away from him. So again, he lives a good life. So that is Issachar, the final words of Issachar. Again, a guy we don't know much about in the Bible. We don't hear a word from him, and we don't really know what happens when he dies. But the Testament gives us a pretty good verdict on him, other than the fact that, again, we know that his descendants, they vanish into the rest of the world. They disappear as part of the lost tribes. But he seems to have at least been blessed in his own lifetime. So, folks, we're going to wrap up there with Issachar. Next time, we're going to come back to his brother, the other son of Leah, the last son of Leah, Zebulun, the other brother. So there's 6 brothers that are sons of Leah, and a daughter, Dinah. So, everybody, we want to wish you a Chag Sameach, good rest of Sukkot. Anybody who wants to come over and shake the lulav in a scheduled, healthy way in our sukkah, please shoot me an email. We had a couple people over yesterday. Please, if you want to, come into the sukkah at our home. And join us tonight at 6 o'clock for our next candidate forum tonight, tomorrow night, and Thursday night at 6 o'clock.
Rabbi, real quick.
Yes.
Last night on Jeopardy, there was a clue, and the answer was the Levites.
There you go. Was it a repeat?
No, it was new.
Wow.
So we made.
Do you remember what the question was?
No, I have no clue.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
I got it right though.
You got it right.
You mean what the answer was? Mom.
Yes, yes. Please say it.
You know, when you get this old, you just can't. You don't have a memory like you used to.
But you did. But you got the.
Wait, were you?
You got the Levites. Yeah. All right, everybody, and we'll fire up the Dodger dogs for everybody tonight too.
Oh, I'm not even watching anymore. I'm done with baseball.
Why? What happened?
Not. You are not.
They're going to lose to the Padres.
Why would you say that?
So I'm a Padre fan.
Oh, you are not.
Stop it. All right. Well, then you're not going to revel in the championship we're going to finally win this year.
No, because it doesn't mean anything.
All right, everybody. Have
All
a
right.
good rest of the day. Chag Sameach.
Much for
And jump on at 6 o'clock. Bye-bye. Bye.